These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious, whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero. one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a Black Power activist lingered even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Wednesday. Well, we've got a really big show today. You know, frequently, 2-3 days a week, typically, we have no guests at all on this program. But today is one of those when it rains, it pours day on the second hour of the program. Well, actually, in just a moment, we're going to start with the first hour of the program with Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925 on the issues of the day. He's a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, former co-chair of the caucus, and he'll be taking your calls in just a second. Also, in the second hour of the program, Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by, and we're going to be talking about inflation, profiteering, and the corporate sector in America. What is really driving inflation? And also I want to get into the media, war-like sports. Are we normalizing the war? Also, Senator Mallory McMorrow, Michigan senator, just an amazing, kick-ass piece of video. We're going to share that with you. And my rant from today from Hartmann Report, that'll also be in our second hour. America needs radical plans to save the environment, not Supreme Court sellouts. In our third hour, arguably one of the top 5 climate scientists on Earth, Dr. Michael Mann, will be with us to talk about the war on Ukraine and how it may well be marking the end of the fossil fuel era. We'll get into that, the politics of that, and actually the science of that in a few moments. But to start out, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is pocan.house.gov, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And he will be with us for the hour, taking your calls. Congressman Pocan, welcome back.
Hey, Tom. It's good to be here.
It's so nice to have you, and to have you for the whole hour. I know last time you had to run off and vote, and appreciate your dropping by today.
I'm back home in Wisconsin. You've got me.
Okay, that's got to be nice. That's got to be, yesterday, in fact, we had a long conversation on the air about mask mandates in the air. Just a lot of people calling and saying that they were going to cancel flights, that they had thought that it was going to be safe. I had a woman call from Hawaii who, lives in Washington State, was in Hawaii on vacation, was planning on coming home today, and was like literally crying on the air saying, I thought, because she's coming home to start her cancer treatment, her second cancer treatment. And so she's severely immune compromised. And now she's going to have to get on a friggin' 5-hour flight from Hawaii with a bunch of yahoos not wearing their masks. I don't know if you have some thoughts on that. Also, Senator Mallory McMorrow, this young woman from Michigan, the young state senator who just got up and just peeled the bark off one of her colleagues who did a fundraiser accusing her of being a groomer. I'm curious your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, to the second point, I heard her speech on the floor. I thought it was amazing. I've got a feeling she's got a good future. Taking on this crap that Republicans are putting out there in order to keep the Q base happy. They put out all these side false issues in order to try to gin up the base that somehow believes these crazy stories. And I thought she did a great job in taking it head on. I think she did what everyone should do when this happens. To the first part, I was listening to your program, Tom, and I'm driving around, and because I have a rural district and I live in a rural area, I'm often listening to your program. I heard her, and I heard the conversation. I just had someone this morning say, "Oh, I'm glad that next time I fly out, I don't have to wear a mask." I'm like, "Well, I'm still wearing a mask on the plane." The airport. I do think at some point now, if they don't put another mandate in because of what CDC guidance may or may not be, the common sense for me prevails that, if I'm in the airport and I'm not right next to someone, I don't feel like I necessarily need to wear the mask personally. But if I'm sitting tightly among folks, especially on a plane, you better bet I'm going to wear a mask just out of, common courtesy, because I have a lot of contact with people. If I'm carrying something that could make someone else perhaps ill, it is, I think, incumbent on me as a human being to wear that mask still. And I very likely am going to do that on planes and in cabs and on the subway, which I take in when I'm in D.C. every day. I just think it's a common courtesy and it's a protection for yourself. So, I think the real question will be, what is the CDC guidance? And as you know, they've been a little bit inconsistent on guidance, and I think that's why there's a question mark on what the next steps might be.
Yeah, I think there's also the issue of precedent with this unqualified 33-year-old judge, one of only 3 judges last year that the American Bar, or the year before last, that the American Bar Association rated as unqualified, that Trump put on the bench anyway.
And I think again, I heard on your program you said not only that, but never been a judge, never tried a case.
That's correct. She was involved in 2 trials when she was a paralegal, and that's it. I mean, that's the limit of her experience in the courtroom. Everything else had been, lawyering from behind a desk. It's incredible. Well, I usually ask you to what you want to toss out as we start. I mean, the phone lines are all full here. People are ready to talk to you. But is there anything first off that you wanted to mention?
Go ahead and take calls, Tom. I kind of feel like we're in that transition period because we've had 2 weeks around Easter that we've been back home. This is often is the period where the elections start. A lot of people, are getting nomination papers and things like that done right now. That changes a little bit how things are looked at in Washington. So I just think we're kind of at that point that really pivots us closer to the election. But I really want to be able to address your callers. So
okay, let's do it.
Go ahead.
Cliff in Santa Fe, New Mexico. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Tom and Congressman, and thank you for the great work that you do. I have a question about voter protection. New Mexico's primary is June 7th, and early voting starts May 10th, which is very soon. We know we're not going to get election legislation through Congress in time to support protecting voters from intimidation, but is the Justice Department making it a priority to protect voters from intimidation using the powers they have?
Yeah, Cliff, I don't have a direct answer on the Justice Department. I wish I did. I do think there are a number of groups in every state that are watching this very closely, who've been through this now a little bit, who are going to be watching to make sure that they have places to pivot. I know in Wisconsin, we've been fortunate and have a number of groups that are watching it and have hotlines set up and everything else. I hope you have that in New Mexico. But I can't tell you specifically if the U.S. Department of Justice has anything lined up for the primary elections, anything unique, other than we are fortunate that groups have been through this, and I believe they are active in every state.
Paul in Green Coast Spring, Florida. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Representative Pocan. Thank you for taking my question. I'm very concerned with this new ruling this Tampa, Florida judge has come out with to eliminate the mask mandate for the entire country. It's actually two parts to my question. The first part is, how can a district judge have the power to do this for the entire country instead of just her district? And my second question is, why is the Biden administration not doing anything about this? I mean, the reaction so far has been nothing. The Department of Justice has not requested a stay on this order, and the CDC has not had any comments. Could you please explain all this?
Sure. Well, to the first question, I mean, because they're a federal judge, it's not like the district they represent is the jurisdiction they solely have for the basis of federal law. So that's why they're able to do that. To the second part, I like I said, I think they have said they're going to do it based on the guidance of CDC. The problem is, you and I know, CDC is not a political agency. They're not always responding in the speed that you and I would like to, and sometimes their messages has been not done in the most coherent way, because again, they're not necessarily political commentators or communicators. They're largely scientists, and I think that's what they're waiting for right now. I think we're in a period where people. There's a COVID hangover that's out there, and people feel like they want it all to be over. I don't think we tell COVID when it's over. I think COVID tells us. The good news is that COVID, it looks like the variants of both Omni and this version of Omicron that are out there look to be pushing out every other variant of COVID. And hopefully what that should mean, according to some of the experts that I've talked to, that it will be a much more mild disease. And we probably this is going to be the period we're entering. But we have to be able to, if there are surges and other reasons, be able to respond. So we are going to need CDC to be much quicker in how they respond, and we need Department of Justice then to be, clear in how they're communicating whatever CDC guidance that they're going to follow. I don't know if we have that yet.
We had, just anecdotally, we had a guy on the program here who wrote like the definitive book about the flu pandemic of 1918, 1919. And he made the point that the worst wave of that pandemic was in 1920. It was the fourth wave on the third year, and it went almost entirely unreported because by that time the whole country was so far past it and unwilling. It didn't even really make the news, even though more people died from the flu that year than in either of the two previous years. It was pretty amazing. You wonder if history is repeating itself. We
might have been through that with the phase we just had, at least I'm hoping, because the number of people is huge that just got it during the January, February period. In fact, there was that. I'll leave it at that. I hear the music.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's 16 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark, a National Progressive Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House. He's a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the former leader of that caucus, and we'll be right back with your calls for him.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Pocan.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And welcome back. Jackie in Port Orchard, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Nina Turner is running for senator in Ohio against an incumbent. The voting is May 3rd. The incumbent is a Democrat, but she's far from progressive, and she's accepted money from Republicans that contributed to her campaign, yet the House Progressive Caucus, which you're a member of, has endorsed Nina's opponent. So here's my two-part question. Please explain why the Progressive Caucus is choosing, they're not clamoring to do everything they can to support Nina Turner, as she and her campaign is the embodiment of progressive values. And the second part is, how would the caucus deal when a progressive runs against Kristen Sinema when she's up for re-election?
Yeah, so there's a few muddled things in there, and I can try to maybe help you. First of all, she's running for Congress, not the Senate. But many of us, including myself, backed Nina Turner when she ran against Chantel in the special election, as did the Progressive Caucus. However, right now, Chantel is an incumbent. We have slightly different policies in place, but also requirements for incumbents that they have to be endorsing 75% of our key 18 bills that we've identified. They have to vote with the caucus 2/3 of the time. They have to attend 50% of our meetings, respond to 80% of the whip questions. She's meeting every qualification. But more importantly, if you look at the ratings like Progressive Punch, Chantel Brown is actually 11th, directly behind me, as most progressive in Congress. So it's not fair to say at all that she's not voting correctly, because she is, and she's abiding by everything the Progressive Caucus requires. That kind of gives you an automatic status as a member, as an incumbent, to an endorsement process, and no one voted against that endorsement. So it's kind of an automatic process when that happens. I don't disagree. Nina Turner is an amazing person, and that's why I backed her when she was running in that open seat. But there is a process for the Progressive Caucus that I think people often forget. And to the money question, that's not a criteria. I mean, everyone gets money from a lot of different sources. I do have great trouble with some of the groups that put funding into elections, period. One being Democratic Majority for Israel, which I don't think exactly discloses what their priorities are. And most recently, there's a crypto group, a billionaire who's putting $1 million per race in. I'm not sure if he's in this race. I don't believe so. But those are things that, are certainly of concern. But we don't have that as part of an endorsement policy, other than we ask candidates whether or not they're taking corporate PAC money. So that is something that I recently talked to someone else about, that, we may eventually down the road make that into our criteria. But if they're signing on to 3/4 of our progressive priority bills, they're voting with us 2/3 of the time, they attend half the meetings and all the other criteria. And if you're the 11th most progressive vote, it's hard not to endorse someone who's a member and incumbent over someone who's a challenger. People may not like that, but that is just the policy that's been in place for a while. And a lot of this criteria recently has been tightened up to make sure that we have real standards for people who are CPC members.
So you don't think that Chantel is a CPC member just to get the endorsement, that she's actually walking the talk?
She would be voting more progressive than 90% of our members, at least by this criteria.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Okay, thank you. 21, for some reason, when you talk over the music, it is muffling your voice. It must be something weird about Zoom or Skype or something. Anyhow, we'll be right back with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So you remember the administration originally said that we're going to give 4 free COVID tests to every household in America. And you can do that, get them delivered by the post office for free by going to covidtests.gov, covidtests.gov. But they said that they're not going to provide free test kits to people on Medicare. Instead, you have to go to covidtest.gov and get your 4 free test kits. Well, they have rethought this. This is a brand new policy. And this will be the first time that Medicare covers free over-the-counter tests of any kind for people who are, or offers free over-the-counter tests for anybody who's on Medicare. The pharmacy, Medicare pays the pharmacy direct, and you pick it up from your pharmacy. So Just an FYI on that, and there are a few other dimensions that have to do with TRICARE and a few other things. We've got a video about it that's over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. AJ in Tampa, Florida, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. So I was curious. I kind of take the approach that I would much rather see my representatives in the community talking to constituents and stuff rather than being in Washington. And with that being said, and the environmental impact of flying back and forth to Washington, why hasn't the House and possibly the Senate rules changed that would allow you guys to actually spend more time with your constituents and doing all of your meetings and even more specifically voting remotely versus having to be in Washington to do that? Yeah, so AJ, you and I think alike in that I have been part of a committee last Congress, modernization, and a proposal that we had in a bipartisan way. Representative William Timmons and I both put this idea forward, and we have a lot of folks who back this. Our leadership does not, but this is what we're working towards. Instead of 3 weeks of 4 days a week, which is what we generally have, and you're flying on one day and you're flying back on another day, and that means you have 2 full days to get an awful lot done. We would like to see 2 weeks a month in Washington for 5 full days. So Monday to Friday, you can still go home on a Friday night and come back by a Monday morning, or you may choose to stay in D.C. that weekend and actually maybe get to know some people on a personal level. But it gives you more floor time and more committee time than 3 weeks of 4 days by having the 2 weeks of 5 days because of the amount of full days that you have. And that would have you in your district then 2 weeks a month, where I agree is where you have to be talking to people so that you're representing them the best when you vote in Washington. Now, that doesn't necessarily address the remote voting. There's a lot of people who, and I do think face-to-face contact does matter, but that answer would address your issue of the flying back and forth and having you in your district more. And I think there's bipartisan support. It's just leadership doesn't really like that because I think it gets members talking to each other a little more, and leadership likes to, I think, sometimes be able to corral their members and make them follow their guidelines. So if we ever have a leadership election, again, I think this is, for some of us, something we're going to try to make people have to address, because I think it has infinite more sense that you're in your district more and you're able to get more done while you're in Washington.
Dennis in Tomah, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We have about a minute and a half to the break.
Morning, gentlemen. My question to the congressman is why the SEC is not doing anything with regards to hedge fund dealers manipulating the stock market on a day-to-day basis, week to week. Thousands of letters have been sent to the SEC complaining about this, and what the hedge funds are doing is, by law, illegal.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any specifics on what you're referring to. I mean, I can't speak for that agency. I can tell you that there are plenty of reasons why, when it comes to hedge funds, we should have much different and more regulation.
Dennis, do you have a specific?
Yes, sir. Specifically, it's called AMC. It's a American Movie Corporation, and originally the hedge funds tried to put it out of business, and the retail investors got onto it and are continually buying stock within that company, but the hedge funds have sold illegitimate stocks in the millions.
Okay, let's let the congressman respond.
Yeah, I'll look into the issue. I just think in general, the way hedge funds operate, from taxation to regulation, should be much tighter than it is. Unfortunately, they're a pretty powerful special interest.
Yeah, there you go. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, National Progressive Town Hall meeting with the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, now a member. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
On the other side of this break with your calls for Congressman Pocan. Pocan.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Daniel in Socorro, New Mexico, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning. Happy 420 Day. In New Mexico now, marijuana is legal, and I'm 70 years old, and I'm so relieved to be able to grow and take my medicine without fear of getting arrested. But it's not like that in the rest of the country, and this is 420, and I thought, what can I do today to help? And so I called both my senators and asked them to call Joe Biden and tell him to take it off the Schedule 1. And I wondered what your recommendations are that I could also do. I can't call my representative; it's a Republican. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
So we just passed a major bill in the House, Daniel, around marijuana. I think reaching out to your senators and trying to see if they can move the bill. I know anything in the Senate is odd these days with the antiquated rules they follow in a 50-50 Senate, but. You're right. I mean, having marijuana on Schedule 1 when it's legal in as many states as it's legal, either as medical marijuana or outright legalization, is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the fact that we're finally getting around to addressing the banking laws, that you can't even put your money in a bank from any kind of a marijuana business. I mean, it just shows how off we are in this area and how far behind we are where real people are at and where the states are at. So I would say, try to push your senators to do the right thing and pass the bill that we passed in the House. So that would go really, really far. And you're right. I mean, having it as Schedule 1 is completely ridiculous, especially given how many states have outright legalization. It just doesn't make any sense.
David in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman and Tom. I wondered why we're not doing more for solving the energy crisis. We're still subsidizing coal and gas to the tune of $600 billion a year, and we're still not as efficient in energy as we could be. There's a real devastating show on Frontline showing how the oil and gas companies had completely sidetracked any efforts and still are trying to say that there's no such thing as climate change. So I know that there must be some good news out there. Do you have any good news?
Well, I try to, although oil companies, you might as well call them oil cartels, right? They're doing nothing to be helpful. In fact, part of the problem that we're facing with inflation around gasoline prices is because they're deciding to maximize shareholder benefits. And they certainly, the fact that we're still subsidizing these wildly profitable companies makes zero sense. And, it's one of the crazy things that Congress does because of those special interests. On the good news front, I guess I would point to the infrastructure bill where we're investing in a solid number of electronic vehicle charging stations across the country, that we're moving forward with incentivizing and working with U.S. auto manufacturers who I think often are too far behind already on production of electronic vehicles. We have a lot more to do. There is no question. But this is one positive area. Since you asked for a positive area, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of positive news on the front of the fact that we still subsidize these companies who make insane amounts of profit and who have done all sorts of bad things not to help the environment, not to move any of these things forward. It is truly a political issue where we need people to speak out more. If the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. We need a lot more vocal leadership coming from people, and maybe we can break some of the problems that occur right now in getting politicians to do the right thing.
Dee in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom and Representative. Can President Biden use an executive order for our voting rights? He's going to need every Democratic vote possible, and the rest of you. Can he do that? Thank you.
If he could, I think he would have already. I think a lot of this is why we're trying to do it statutorily. The problem is, again, back to the Senate side of things. If we don't get this right, we don't have a democracy, period, right? Between this and I also think campaign finance, we're seeing some real ugly things, new things happening, Tom, that I am greatly concerned about. And you can't do a lot of this just by executive action. That's why we need to get some statute moving. We need to do things still like overturning Citizens United. But our democracy really is at risk in more than almost any other way when it comes to voting rights and campaign finance. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as just having an executive order. Are there those new things that you're concerned about? You want to identify any of them? Yeah, it's some of the new. It's the use of these super PACs on the outside getting involved. Mm-hmm. And specifically, right now, there's one, and I'm forgetting the name of it, Tom, but it's a crypto billionaire who's behind of it, and his stated purpose is preparedness for COVID, but he's endorsed all over the board politically, some progressive candidates, some more conservative Democrats. But he's stating, their PAC is stating, I should say, that they're going to put $1 million into each primary that they're getting involved with. $1 million in a primary skews a primary in ways that I can't even begin to describe, that big money getting involved. We're also seeing this with some groups like Democratic Majority for Israel and some others putting in these really big dollars into primaries, something we hadn't seen previously. And we're starting to see some slippage in commitments to not taking corporate PAC money as well. So I am concerned on campaign finance that we're seeing some new phenomena that I can't say if it's right or wrong because I haven't talked to the PAC directly. However, whenever a group can put $1 million into a primary when you may not even see $1 million spent by either candidate in that primary, to me, that's a fundamental problem with the system. Yeah, it becomes the tail wagging the dog. Exactly. Brian in Tacoma, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi, thank you. This is in regards to the mask mandates dropping on airlines that we've been talking about. I have to travel overseas a couple times for work, and so my ability to protect myself has been severely hampered with these mask mandates going away, which I don't agree with, but they are gone. And so I still have to test negative to come back to America. So if we're moving to the point of the pandemic where we don't care about people's lives anymore, which I'm not at, but apparently this country is, we need to drop the mandates to test to get back into America. Otherwise, so can you do something about that? Yeah, I mean, my guess is the same answer will be what was given on the mask mandate is that they're going to look to CDC guidance. And I don't know how fast they're going to do that. And I don't know, I hope it'll be based on the science and not on political expediency, as we've talked about earlier. Unfortunately, I think the COVID hangover just has people in a point that they're kind of moved on, even though we don't tell COVID when to move on. But unfortunately, that is the position in most states. And now with this judicial order, it appears to be as it's going to affect us in any kind of travel.
Randy in Caledonia, Wisconsin. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
How you doing? This is Iron Stash, and I just wanted to reach out. How you doing?
Good.
Wanted to thank you both. I had the opportunity. Usually, I'm driving out my car and listen to you on the Sirius XM, but here I'm sitting down and actually had the opportunity to see you on my TV screen through speech.
You said you're Randy the Iron Stash?
Yes.
Ho, hey, great. Okay.
And like I said, two of my favorite people. When I called in, I was told, just don't call and thank. You have to have have to have an actual question. So,
okay, so your question.
The questions are, with the new redistricting, how does Congressman Pocan see the third CD coming about with Representative Kind leaving? And it looks like there's a more favorable first CD district for, potential for the future.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Randy, it's great to hear your voice. For people who may not know, although I think many people know Randy, he was taking on at the time the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and I think is a big reason why Paul Ryan decided to run away from Congress. So I am always going to be in debt to Randy. And, coming as a candidate from the working class, much like myself, I really appreciate it. Randy was a great person to work with when he was running. So it's great to hear your voice. In Wisconsin, Tom and listeners, the 3rd Congressional District, Ron Kind, is one of those seats that if we don't hold, we likely don't have the majority in Congress. So it's really important. The Republican nominee is a person who came within 20,000 votes of beating Ron Kind, who since that election used campaign funds to attend the January 6th insurrection, pictures of him on Capitol grounds, and got in a fight with a 17-year-old intern at the Prairie du Chien Library over an LGBT book display. And then he proceeded to check out all the books but one because someone was reading it, I think with the intention not to return them, but because he got busted, had to return the books. This is an extremist, and it's a seat that Congress depends on. So, Randy, I think it's a swing district that I think we can still win, but really it's going to depend on a lot of these tides around inflation and issues like that. The 1st Congressional District, which is, again, Paul Ryan's old district, currently represented by Brian Stile, that now is only a 2-point Republican district. So absolutely in play. And, now Wisconsin has 2 competitive districts. The rest, unfortunately, are not especially competitive by the makeup. But those 2 are really important to any national outcomes.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program, our National Progressive Town Hall meeting. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House, former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, now an esteemed member. We'll be right back. Oh, and his website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the congressman in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
With Mark on the place where smart people get their news, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Jim in Cleveland, Ohio. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi,
Congressman.
Congressman Pocan and Thom Hartmann. I watch your show every day. Thanks for having me on. I just have a simple question. We have 4 people running for the Senate, Republican Senate here in Ohio. Each and every one of them has stated that they are pro-Trump. And I don't know why our Democrats aren't jumping on that, saying that if you're pro-Trump, you're pro-Putin.
Yeah, Jim, I can't tell you specifically on the candidates in that state, although I know my colleague Tim Ryan is one of them. But it's a fair question to ask people where they stand. If they're the guy they admire so much, has been praising Putin until just very, very recently, where do they stand on that? I think that's a very fair question that voters would love to know.
Okay. Hang on just a second here. Sarah in Tarzana, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
I'm glad I got through today because this time for me it's very personal. I have family on vacation in Hawaii right now. And obviously they're going to have to get back on a plane to get back. Part of my family has to go as far as Atlanta. And I'm sure that there's going to be problems with people not wanting to wear masks. And my family's fully vaxxed, but just the thought that people can get COVID in spite of being masked up and vaccinated, it worries me a lot because this is personal to me. That somebody's making it really hard to make sure that people who get on airplanes are masked. And I wonder if there's anything you guys can do to stop this obviously unqualified, badly rated, if rated at all, judge from being able to put something out that's putting people across the country in the millions in danger of their lives.
Yeah, Sarah, and we've had a couple discussions on this. I think, one thing that's important, and I don't know the information on this, Tom, but I still believe the masks are good at protecting folks. If you have a good N95 or KN95, that is good protection, where we know with the vaccine you can still get Omicron. So, I wish I knew the exact numbers to tell you.
The New York Times this morning said you have a 54% increase in your own protection if you're the only person wearing a mask.
Yeah.
If everybody's wearing a mask, it goes up into the 90s.
Of course. But at least that is something, right? I mean, so you can have that assurance. And I think if you, for now, I don't have a better answer with the airlines if they're willing to be more reasonable about seating or anything else, because I'm guessing with spring break, planes are pretty full and they've been running them pretty full. But yeah, it's when something happens this quickly, people who would have made maybe other plans around traveling don't have that opportunity. And again, that's what you get when you have unqualified people put into federal court positions like Donald Trump did.
Congress used to have a rule that if airlines wanted to have allow smoking, they had to do it in the last 10 rows of the plane or whatever it was. There were smoking sections. You may be old enough to remember those. I used to fly all the time, and they were terrible. How about a mask section in the front of the plane and a no mask section in the back?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what develops out of this, Tom. I think this is very, very good.
Yeah, something for the airlines to think about if Congress doesn't. Amazing. 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. I think I've got to read an ad on the other side. I'll be right back with you. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. So did you hear the story about the three white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in 3 different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for 3 basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. It's suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Hour. And Dan in Omaha, Nebraska, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call. Congressman, I have a problem, and it's been bothering me for a long time. It's Medicare Part C, which is not Medicare. And they get the right to attach that name and fool elderly people all the time, and 40% of people who could have just been living on their Medicare are now paying for that awful insurance policy. And no one is doing a thing about it, but CMS is not being loud enough to tell people who are going to be Medicare recipients that Part C is a sham. And I've seen the Democrats do absolutely nothing about this.
How about a law like the disclosure laws on pharmaceutical advertising, where they have to say, this drug may cause sudden death, that on any Medicare Advantage advertising that must say Medicare Advantage programs are not Medicare, they are private insurance?
Yeah, no, I'm writing that down because we've had this conversation a few times, and Tom's book on healthcare has a great section on this. Lloyd Doggett from Texas, who serves on the Ways and Means Committee, has a bill to address this. And I don't know if you've ever had a chance to connect yet, Tom, because Lloyd really is kind of the congressional expert on this. And but absolutely, this should be a bigger discussion. And your book, I think, covers this very well. But I'm writing that suggestion down because, I think many of us should be concerned about how it operates.
Yeah, just a simple disclaimer, if nothing else. It seems like the least that could be done. But anyhow, Zach in Los Angeles. Hey, Zach, what's on your mind today? You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. So the entertainment industry in America has mostly moved to other countries, Vancouver being one of the biggest ones in Canada and Montreal. And what they're doing is they're getting around all the worker protections and payment and everything and taking American workers to these companies to work for the American industry. But the computers that they're using are still in America because there's protections on the computers. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can protect people the same way that we're protecting the stuff that they're working on?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think, one of the things we learned through COVID was the fact that we don't produce things here in the quest to save nickels and dimes and increase shareholder returns has cost us mightily. And I think, this seems to be a lesson that may be occurring in the entire entertainment industry as well. In order to save a little bit of money, if they're doing things like this, there could be a real price to pay down the road. So I don't know specifically, because this is the first time I'm hearing of this issue, Zach, but I do think we have plenty of lessons we've just recently learned that when people try to go either out of the country to save a little bit, often there's not a real savings at all that occurs.
Pat in Burlington, Vermont. You're on the air with Representative Pocan, and we're down to about 2 minutes before the end of the hour. Well, maybe 3. Okay, go ahead, Pat.
Hi. Yes, Representative Pocan. I'm wondering why more Americans aren't afraid of the direction this country is going in with the book banning down to the LGBTQ situation. There is so much hate. It reminds me of when I was growing up during World War II, and I saw this going on in Germany. We saw it on the Pathé News, and it scares me. Please, can we do anything?
Yeah, Pat, you bring up a great point. When you don't have the public with you on the issues, we know on almost every issue, the majority of the public are with progressives, whether it be healthcare, education, environment. They have to win in other ways. So whether it be money in campaigns or by scaring the heck out of people, that's what they often do. So, the issues of book burning or trying to demonize certain groups of people. We thought we were past the LGBT discrimination, that Republicans had ginned up. And then with marriage equality, largely it went away with the public. But they found now a way to go after trans kids and others. And from the Don't Say Gay to other bills that are out there in places like Texas and Florida. So there should be concern, right? They're going to try to resurrect these issues for their small parts of their base, that this is important, but they're doing it in a way that really, really hurts people. We all need to speak out and stand out. I thought that state senator from Michigan did a great job the other day when they tried to accuse her of grooming people as part of their Q rhetoric that they're out there doing. We all need to be vocal and aggressive and not passive as they make these attacks.
And I'm increasingly sick and tired of Republicans grooming children to own guns. I mean, anyhow, we have 15 seconds. Your thoughts on the coming week?
Next week, I think we're all back, House and Senate, so things will be starting up. It's so important that people do what I know you help them do, Tom, so often, is call their members of the House and the Senate to be heard. If the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. We have to make that our mantra. Please be active.
There you go. Thank you, Congressman Pocan. It's so great having you with us, and thank you again for dropping by.
Of course. Thank you so much, Tom.
Okay. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can check it out. And, of course, on Twitter, Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be back in just a moment with Professor Richard Wolff. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at CozyEarth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B. And it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2-to-1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. Efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number 4. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream. And you can find it online.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent is The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Democracyatwork.info is the website, as well as rdwolf.com, and you can tweet him at ProfWolf with 2 F's at the end. Professor Wolff, we have been talking about inflation, and I have 2 questions to put to you. The first is, the monthly figures come out for inflation, and the most recent one was less than 1% for the month, but everybody multiplied that by 12 and said, oh my God, it's over 8%. When you have monthly variations throughout the course of the year, and it may well end up that the year is over 8%, or it may end up that it's way below that. Number one, why do we always take these monthly numbers and magnify them? And number 2, to what extent is the current inflation that we're experiencing, given the evidence that we're finding of how corporate America is behaving right now, being driven by corporate greed as opposed to oil shocks or pent-up demand or other things?
Okay, on the first question, there really isn't much sense. Graduate students in economics are routinely told, don't get attached to any particular monthly statistic because it'll change and you can't generalize from one month. And that's true. On the other hand, by watching month by month, and by the way, there are people who watch it week by week, but watching month by month does give you a sense of the direction. And people who have to make plans for things that won't happen for 2 months or 6 months or 12 or 18, they are often very needy of some sense of where it's going in order to make decisions now that won't really pan out for several months. And so it's always guesswork. And they like to have a sense of where it's going. So with our inflation numbers, since the number has gone up every month, excuse me, it's a pretty good bet that we aren't yet out of the woods not only in terms of an inflation, but an inflation that's getting worse.
Right.
Only if we were on the inside of a private capitalist enterprise, really knowing what their books tell us, only then would we have the evidence to determine whether a price increase is designed to jack up profits or has some other justification or motivation. Since these companies who are telling us why they're raising prices never let us look at their books, they're asking us to believe them when they have an immense incentive to not tell us that profit is in fact what's driving the inflation.
How, if we were to put into place a windfall profits tax, for example, which, has been discussed in Democratic circles a lot recently, how do you do that? I mean, I'm thinking back to the 70s, but back in the 70s, when a corporation reported that they had a $300 million profit this year, they also reported that to the IRS and they paid taxes on that $300 million profit. Right. Somehow corporations have come up with a two-book accounting system these days where they say to their stockholders, hey, we had a $30 billion profit this year and we're going to distribute part of that as dividends to you. And then they say to the IRS, oh, hey, we lost money. I'm sorry, we don't owe any taxes. So how do you even put into place a windfall profits tax if, as you said, Professor Wolff, these corporations are not sharing their actual books with us?
Well, the way it's been done in the past, I mean, everything you say is correct, and the only genuine, rational way would be to open the books. And so we can all see what's going on, and we can all make an agreement on what we're going to do, and there aren't these shenanigans. But as long as we allow corporations to keep the books to themselves, we are at their mercy. So what was done with excess profits tax was a simple formula, which, because it was simple, wasn't altogether fair from one company to another. But here's what was done. You take an average. Typically, you take an average profit over the previous, say, 3 years before the excess profits tax is to go into effect, and you say, okay, over those 3 years, this was the average. And if you want to be very nice, you say, if it was rising across these 3 years, we'll take the average and we'll increase it by the average rate of increase over those 3 years. And that will be considered the profit you were entitled to get this year when the excess profits tax goes into effect. But if you made more than that, if you reported that to the IRS, or if you reported it to your shareholders because you want them to think well of you as a board of directors, well, then the excess profit tax hits right there. And I should remind people, the excess profits tax had its origin early in American history. It has come up repeatedly. And usually the rationale was that something was going on that was disproportionately profiting a very small number of people and costing a very large number of people a great deal, and that elemental justice would call for saying we shouldn't allow a war, which is the time that it was most often brought into the conversation. If we're making American men and women die fighting for the country wherever, then it is somehow ugly and grotesque to allow other people who are not fighting and risking their lives to make a fortune off of the same war. And so war profiteering became this, you had this during the Second World War, war profiteering became something everybody said we should not allow, and it seemed reasonable taxing the excess profits of the defense sellers in order to help the families of people whose people had been killed or wounded fighting for the country. Right. And you could make a parallel argument about COVID. We've lost 1 million people, lives destroyed, families destroyed. Is it reasonable for billionaires to become even richer with money that could be taxed and used to compensate people who weren't blessed by the COVID disaster, but were destroyed by it? being compensated by part of the gains of those who made money off of the hard times.
This is what FDR had to say about that.
Our present emergency and a common sense of decency make it imperative that no new group of war millionaires shall come into being in this nation as a result of the struggles abroad. The American people will not relish the idea of any American citizen growing rich and fat in an emergency of blood and slaughter and human suffering.
Professor Wolff, we have 30 seconds. Do you think that sort of message could fly today?
I think it could. I think if we had a courageous leadership that was willing to say, and I couldn't say it one iota better than President Roosevelt just did. I think the American people would surprise many by how strongly they would react to all of that.
Yeah.
Polls suggest it, and decency is exactly the right word. It would be, I think, widely supported.
Yeah, and in fact, he put Harry Truman in charge of rooting out the war profiteers, and they went to town. Professor Richard Wolff, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you again.
Same here, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back with radical plans to save the environment, not Supreme Court sellouts. And welcome back. Paul in Benton, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. In regards to the quote-unquote Medicare Part C, they already do have disclaimers. It's like in fine print at the bottom or the top of the ad, it'll say, not affiliated with any government agency or, not a government program or something like that. And then it'll say, like, by such and such insurance group or whatever.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
I hadn't caught
my friend's wife, she's got cancer, and she was on regular Medicare, and she wanted to get a supplement plan. Well, they would not sell her a supplement plan because of her pre-existing condition, and she was actually forced off of Medicare onto a Medicare Part C plan because they couldn't reject her for pre-existing conditions.
Huh. I believe some of them can, A, but B, that's the problem with when you go on Medicare, I think you have a year, maybe it's 2 years, to pick up a supplement plan to go along with your Medicare, and if you don't, you can be stuck with that 20% hole there that that the Republicans were so outspoken about wanting, so that people have skin in the game back in the 1960s. So
I remember that.
Yeah, so I get it. Paul, thank you. Thanks for the heads up on that. And yeah, okay, so there's fine print. Let's turn it into, like on the ads on drugs, an actual voice having to say the truth so that people hear it. Thank you for that. Christopher in Vancouver. Hey, Christopher, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Hey, I just want to let you know, in Clark County, it's going to be a very interesting election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Herrera Butler is being primaried by 3 Republicans. The first time that she's had some Republican resistance there. And Joe Kent's one of them, who was endorsed by Trump. And there's 3 Democrats that are running as well. And it's going to be a very interesting race because right now one of the Democrats is ahead of Joe Kent, who had a debate already on the radio. And but there's a new Democratic candidate called Marie Perez, and she's fabulous. And
interesting. You've got a very active Democratic Party in Clark County there, and they do a great job.
And I'm a phone bank expert too. I phone bank for the candidates of choice. And
oh, really? Tell me about how you got into that.
Well, I got involved with the local Democratic Party here, And I used to knock on doors, which I like based on my background in sales and marketing. You want to see their eyes, you want to see their body language,
sure.
You want to hear what they have to say. But the pandemic kind of closed that down, which in a way, Tom, it was a great thing because of the fact that I can reach more people on the phone.
Sure. It's more efficient.
And what? Yes, indeed.
Is it as effective at changing minds, though?
Well, that's a good question. One candidate in the last general, she is a WSU professor, history professor, and many of the people that you got to go.
Yeah. Well, you can finish your thought.
I was just wondering, Tom, if one of the Democrats win the primary, could you interview them?
Yeah, for general election candidates, sure, absolutely. Just have them pitch it to Sean. Her contact information is over at thomhartmann.com. Christopher, thank you very much. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is titled, America Needs Radical Plans to Save the Environment, Not Supreme Court Secret Sellouts. And I started out telling a story of Brazil. Oddly enough, Lula, the former president of Brazil, who is trying to make a comeback right now, he's running against Bolsonaro. He just came out and basically endorsed vegetarianism. He tweeted, I'm not just talking about people going back to eating barbecue, but also vegetarian people who don't eat meat, being able to get a good organic salad and encouraging healthier agriculture in our country. The reason he's saying this is because the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, is being absolutely destroyed, and one of the main reasons is cattle, animal agriculture. So, Brazil and the Brazil Supreme Court now has what they call the green docket. They're starting to take on some of these green cases, rights of nature cases, rights of the Amazon forest, jungle, things like that. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we've got 5 reactionary Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court who just restored a rule that Donald Trump had put into place in 2020 that said that mining and drilling operations could pour more of their toxic poisons, including arsenic and mercury, which are just, arsenic causes cancer and neurological damage, and mercury causes severe neurological damage in children, both of these substances, as well as selenium and other compounds from fracking and drilling and stuff, that they could pour more of this stuff into our water, into our waterways, into our rivers and streams, so that, kids living in cities downstream will get more poison in their tap water. So the U.S. Supreme Court just did this. Now, they didn't do it with any public arguments. They didn't hear a single argument. They did this through the so-called shadow docket, where they basically meet in secret, if they even meet. In this case, it looks like 5 conservatives got together and said, okay, that's it. Let's let, industry poison America more effectively. I mean, it's really pretty breathtaking, particularly when you consider that of those 5 conservatives who did this, at least 2 of them probably should have recused themselves. Barrett, her father was an oil industry lawyer virtually his entire career. And Gorsuch's mother, Neil Gorsuch's mother, Ann Gorsuch, Ronald Reagan put her in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency, where she tried to gut that agency. And this Supreme Court decision is about gutting the EPA. She tried to gut the EPA and ended up having to resign in disgrace. Not to mention, Clarence Thomas, clearly in the pockets of the whole Koch network, which is affiliated with the fossil fuel industry and whatnot. I mean, this is pretty astonishing. And this, by the way, was a rule that was put into place by Andrew Wheeler, the coal and chemical industry lobbyist that Donald Trump put in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. Andrew Wheeler also replaced the Clean Power Plan, that, and thus we have a weaker rule on air pollution. He gutted core protection for the Clean Water Act. He rolled back the mercury and air toxics standards. He eliminated the EPA's Office of the Science Advisor. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, if Brazil can at least start, and, you know, Brazil is no environmental angel here, but if they can have at least a conversation about starting to clean up their environment in a way that will affect climate change, can't we have a Supreme Court that will actually listen to debates on these issues rather than just knee-jerk supporting the fossil fuel industry?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And perhaps most importantly, why is it that when this happened and to this day, the news industry in the United States, the media, have largely ignored this? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, It also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's past the hour. Welcome back, 34 minutes past the hour. I'll be picking up your phone calls in just a moment on pretty much any of the topics that Congressman Pocan touched on or that we've touched on today. There's a lot of territory there. But I wanted to share with you Senator Mallory McMorrow. She is a state senator from my home state of Michigan. I was born in and grew up in Michigan, and feel a deep affinity for the state. And I'm so impressed by this woman. So I just apropos of nothing in particular, other than that this is what she is doing is what I was calling for in my daily take yesterday on HartmannReport.com, where I said that Democrats are suffering from a lack of outrage, and they need to start speaking up in a way that's seriously pissed off about what Republicans are up to, particularly all these bizarre QAnon kinds of charges. And so here she is, Senator Mallory McMorrow of Michigan.
I didn't expect to wake up yesterday to the news that the senator from the 22nd district had overnight accused me by name of grooming and sexualizing children in an email fundraising for herself. Why me? And I realized, because I am the biggest threat to your hollow, hateful scheme. Because you can't claim that you are targeting marginalized kids in the name of, quote, parental rights if another parent is standing up to say no. So then what? Then you dehumanize and marginalize me. You say that I'm one of them. You say she's a groomer. She supports pedophilia. She wants children to believe that they were responsible for slavery and to feel bad about themselves because they're white. No child alive today is responsible for slavery. No one in this room is responsible for slavery. But each and every single one of us bears responsibility for writing the next chapter of history. Each and every single one of us decides what happens next and how we respond to history and the world around us. We are not responsible for the past. We also cannot change the past. We can't pretend that it didn't happen or deny people their very right to exist. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. We cannot let hateful people tell you otherwise, to scapegoat and deflect from the fact that they are not doing anything to fix the real issues that impact people's lives. And I know that hate will only win if people like me stand by and let it happen. So I want to be very clear right now. Call me whatever you want. I hope you brought in a few dollars. I hope it made you sleep good last night. I know who I am. I know what faith and service means and what it calls for in this moment. We will not let hate win.
Wow. Wow. Spot on. Mallory McMorrow, the new Democratic superstar out there. And thank you for that. Steve in Palm Springs, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, happy 420, Tom.
Thank you. Back at you.
In your first hour, the congressman mentioned legislation to allow marijuana businesses to use the federal banking system, and I am dead set against that.
Why?
Because I voted for legalization not to create another tentacle of the pharmaceutical industry, but for individual medical freedom. For centuries, people have been growing hemp and using it for their medical purposes, and I want that to continue. I want people's sainted grandmothers to be able to go out to their garden and plant their marijuana between their roses and their tomatoes, and make some tea and ease whatever pain.
So, Steve, what do you say to the person who lives in an apartment building and can't grow anything in there because they don't have a garden, and they want to be able to go down to the local dispensary and buy some pot, and the local dispensary, once they get that person's money, would like to be able to deposit it in the bank? I mean, what's wrong with free enterprise?
Because the way the economics works in this country, any successasful marijuana organization is going to get bought up by another big one and another big one.
Well, then let's start enforcing antitrust laws.
Oh, as you know as well as we did, as I do, this country gave up on antitrust laws with Reagan and maybe Nixon.
No, it was 83 that Reagan stopped enforcing it. And Nixon actually used the antitrust laws to break up AT&T. It didn't resolve, that situation didn't resolve itself until the Carter administration. But Nixon was the one who started the breakup of AT&T. So,
well, the point is that hemp and medical hemp usage has been free for centuries, and I want it to continue to be free. George Carlin proved to us in his record Toledo window box that you can grow marijuana in a window box in an apartment. That was 50 years ago.
Yeah, but not everybody has the ability, not everybody has the skill, and people would like. And one of the nice things about buying pot from a dispensary is you can look on the label and see exactly how strong it is, so you know what you're getting.
Well, not everybody wants to vote or gives a crap about democracy, but we need to do that, and I think that we need to. I think there's a lot of things we don't want to do. We make excuses that we can't do, but that we should do. And one of those minor things is to avoid creating another tentacle of the pharmaceutical industry. And that I voted for legalization because I want people who want pot to grow it themselves for free.
All right, I got it, Steve. And apparently I'm not going to convince you otherwise. So, okay, we'll agree to disagree. Thank you very much. Tony in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I'm 81 years old. Retired to Florida from the West Coast, basically 15 years ago for a lower cost of living. I want to warn people that Governor DeSantis is quite likely to be the next president of the United States.
I agree.
And if you look at what he's done, it follows Putin. He's banned books. He's gone after a marginalized group, particularly trans kids and gay people. He's enacted a law, and when I say enacted, it has a legislature which is totally, on its knees in front of him because it's heavily GOP, right-wing GOP.
Right.
The Democrats nationally need to recognize this. If the Republicans win the House and the Senate, which is quite likely this fall, then Ron DeSantis will have everything that he's enacted will be, approved by
right,
the
and
Supreme
he's the
Court.
guy who's going to take the mantle of Trump, number one. And number two, now you've got state after state where they're saying we're going to change, where they have changed their laws so that even if the people vote for a Democrat in the fall for president of the United States, those states will still be able to say, oh no, we're going to make DeSantis the president. And in fact, my op-ed today, the piece that I published today that I shared with you earlier about, the Brazil Supreme Court versus the U.S. and all this kind of stuff. The last sentence of it is, if we deal with this problem, then we can attend to the next big problem that we're facing, which is the coming fascist administration of Ron DeSantis. And I am completely with you, Tony, and I think Americans really, really need to pay attention to this. Thank you very much for the call. Terrence in Spring Lake, Michigan. Hey, Terrence, what's on your mind today? Terrence, you are on the air.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Tom.
Hey.
Hey, I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
Let me get to the point. I guess, the program that I'm watching had a couple of points, and one of them was socialism, capitalism, but that's not what I want to talk about. And the other one was the guy in New York who couldn't grow a marijuana plant, or could grow a marijuana plant, either or. But I just want to get to that, if we do the numbers in terms of, back in 1984, and even before that, with the whole Nicaraguan situation with Kenneth North and, the whole war.
Terrence, forgive me, but your microphone, your phone is really, really muffled, and it's really hard for me to understand what you're saying. So could you please just make your point real quickly?
Yes, I will. Do you think the war on drugs was a big waste of money and time?
Do I think what is a big waste of money and time?
The war on drugs back in the 1980s.
The war on drugs, yes, of course.
Right, and why?
Well, it was something that Richard Nixon did in order to as he said, I mean, this is, and thanks for the call, Terrence, this is something that John Ehrlichman told a reporter, Dan, I'm forgetting Dan's last name, but he told this reporter this like a decade ago. I mean, he's passed away now, I believe. But he said, we had two enemies in the Nixon administration back in the late 60s and early 70s. We had the anti-war hippies, and we had African Americans who were demanding civil rights. These were the two identified enemies of the Nixon administration. So what did we do? Well, the hippies liked to smoke pot, and heroin was the scourge of the black community. So what we did is we heavily criminalized both of these drugs so that we could every single day on television villainize these people. We could use these to go after their leadership. We could spy on them and use the war on drugs as an excuse, and we could disrupt their communities. Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Yes, we did, said John Ehrlichman. So I think that chapter has been closed, other than the fact that we still have, as a consequence of the war on drugs, we still have, the Schedule 1 for marijuana that makes it impossible for the dispensaries to use banks.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And that was the earlier caller who was saying he wants to keep it that way, and I'm scratching my head going, in what universe does that make sense? Oregon's. Hey, Scott, you're on the air. What's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Hey, happy 420. I was reading some online, just some information from Florida, the local newspapers about the banned science books. And a Florida representative, State Representative Escamani, posted 2 tweets. One was there were spreadsheets that listed all the books that they applied for, and then all the books that were accepted. And it's kind of interesting going through it. But a couple quick things that came out of it. The first was that all the K through 5 books are from one company. It's called Accelerate Learning, LLC, and they're a Carlyle subsidiary.
That's right. And, they're owned by the Carlyle
Group.
Who Poppy Bush was the president of at one point.
And the new governor of Virginia.
That's right. That's right. Glenn Youngkin was the CEO too. Yeah.
And of all the books above that, the 6 through 12 books, there's most of them are 80% of those books go to these little funny LLCs with names like Big Ideas Learning, Agile Mind Learning, Study Edge, and stuff. But okay. And then there's 2 big groups, the McGraw-Hill and Houghton Mifflin Hardcourt, which are massive publishers. They got 20% of those books. But here was the thing: when I was looking at it, all of the McGraw-Hill and HMH books all had at least 5 authors, which is typical for math books. All of the others, all of those, the small LLCs had 1 or 2 only, and it was the same 1 or 2 authors for all of the books. From kindergarten through honors, physics,
so basically,
high school.
The entire school system of Florida is being reduced down to books from just a very, very small number of sources who have, hardcore affiliations with far-right folks.
That's what I was seeing. So when you tell me with the one author that can do, kindergarten arithmetic all the way up through algebra, honors chemistry and honors calculus and statistics, the same person's being assigned to write all those books, something smells grifty to me.
You wonder if it's a way of passing money to companies that, are big supporters of DeSantis and the Republican Party, if it's that kind of corruption. Or if these books are being produced by companies and authors who are such ideologues that they slip in, concepts, the Democrats being communists or something like that, subtly into their books, or if they're slipping neoliberal ideology into their book, in a free market. I don't know the answer to that question. Do you have any sense of it, Scott?
Well, I think they're shooting the arrow at the bullseye of privatization. Again, this is the old song and dance that Republicans love to do. Right, they love to defund
But I mean, the big textbook publishers are private corporations.
Well, yes, and so are the big ones are too. But they, when it just doesn't look good when you've got one person writing the entire textbook for K through 12. Yeah. And on the other end, the people that have been the big ones that have been doing this for a long time have 5, 6 authors in their books.
Right. Well, which is just. I thought that was it. It's just good. I mean, that's the way to do it. So that these authors they're like checks and balances on each other. And diversity of perspective. Net. Yeah, exactly. Net, Exactly. Yeah. Scott, thanks for that. Thanks for the information. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. I don't know if you caught this, but there was a piece of legislation before the House of Representatives that explicitly required the U.S. State Department to preserve any evidence of war crimes committed by the Russian forces in Ukraine. To gather reports of it, to preserve it, presumably in anticipation of some sort of a war crimes prosecution. And for reasons I can't quite figure out, maybe you have an idea, 6 Republicans voted against this. No, we don't want the war crimes of the Putin administration to be. Thomas Massey from Kentucky, Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, Warren Davidson from Ohio, Andy Biggs from Arizona, and Paul Gosar from Arizona. I'm scratching my head here. Why would these 6 Republican politicians not want us to preserve the war crimes evidence? There's a video about this that you can see over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls. Scott in Berea in Washington. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. A good point as far as what you were talking about, decriminalizing and reducing the schedule penalty of, pot, is that, and you probably have seen it in Portland too, a lot of these places have had some fairly serious incidents of robbery and violence against them.
Yes.
And when the robbers take the, cash, or it doesn't even have to be a robbery, it could be something like a fire, they're out of it and have no way of replacing it, where if they can go through the banking system and take cards and whatever, then they're covered.
Right.
So that alone is a huge reason why, you're right, and that other caller was probably wrong in his opinion.
I'm in favor of a marijuana industry. I get it that, we don't want big pharma moving in, and I don't want to be getting my pot from Merck. I'd really rather, keep the big guys out. But I think the solution to that is not to keep marijuana illegal, but to start enforcing the antitrust laws. And that's kind of a, it's almost a red herring. But Scott, thank you. Thanks for weighing in on that. I appreciate it. Bart in Benicia, California. Hey, Bart, what's up?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great. Per your request, teamairdrop.org is now up and running. That's the marketing campaign we put together to basically try to get back past the social media, echo chambers. Essentially what it is, we copied this from the people doing work in Russia right now, where they're putting Ukrainian information into, restaurant reviews and things like that to try to get past the Russian blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Information blocks. And our plan is to do the same thing for the swing states. So if you go to teamairdrop.org, it explains the whole process, and we're asking everybody, please, just to go there, look it up, and just follow the steps. They're pretty easy, but essentially it'd be like saying, hey, I love the hash browns here. Great place. I'm going to come back. By the way, check out Thom Hartmann for a great read while you're dining. Something like that. Maybe not a blatant ad, but
I've seen those kinds of embedded plugs in Yelp reviews, and then I've seen Yelp scrub them and ban people who post them. I mean, how do you deal with that?
Well, one thing is to not make it a blatant ad. Basically, do like you do with emails, where you can put in like quotes. For example, if I had one of your quotes, I could say, one of my favorite quotes of the day is this, and then they might search your name and look you up, basically, right? Mm-hmm. The other way is to do it. You can also set up a separate email account, basically, as being anonymous. And if they terminate that account, you just do another one. Just as long as you don't violate, some law or whatever, right? It's mainly just
it's terms of service, not the law. It's most of these sites that allow reviews don't allow promotion of politics or promotion of commercial products in their reviews, and they will come after you for that.
Yeah, these guys, they'll just basically shut you down, basically, so you can't. We're going to cancel your account here.
Well, interesting. Give me a shout in a week or so and let me know how it's going, Bart. It sounds like a fascinating idea. I know you first floated it on this program. I'm fascinated to hear how it plays out. Bart, thanks a lot for the call. Mary Sue in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Mary Sue, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Ron DeSantis. I'm just terrified about this man. He has now he's putting a bill through the legislature. I don't know if you're aware of it, but he wants the tenure of college professors to be up every 5 years for review, and he wants to make sure that they're not teaching students what he doesn't think they should teach them.
Right. This is a way of blowing up tenure, basically.
Yes. And he's got the Don't Say Gay bill. Everything he's doing, and I heard you say a few minutes ago that you think that he might be the next president.
I do.
What are we going to do?
I think we need to be sounding the alarm. Mary Sue, you and I need to be Paul Revere right now. We need to be warning the people. This guy is using Putin's playbook, which, by the way, was not original to Putin. Orban did it, Mussolini did it, Hitler did it. You rag on minorities. You find a minority that you can go after. For Hitler, it was gays, Jews, communists, and trade unionists. For Ron DeSantis, it's trans kids and black people and history teachers and public school teachers in general. And then
math books.
Yeah. Banning books. This is the Nazi playbook that Ron DeSantis is running. Let's make no mistake about it. And if he becomes president, get ready. Hold on to your hat. But I think that he has a very good chance of becoming our next president. Mary Sue, I share your concern. Yeah, and it's all the more reason to be talking about and flagging what's going on down there in Florida. Mary Sue, thank you so much for the call from Sarasota and for keeping us all aware of what's going on. We'll be back with hour 3 of the program. Dr. Michael Mann is going to drop by. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last 2 chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections, yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians off of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in Chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers, Carlos Marcello, New Orleans, Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida, and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal. He's out to tell his dream, and then it's just an absolutely fascinating story. Original Wisdom, Stories of an Angel. Robert Wolff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. You know, every now and then you come across data that you didn't know, and it's like, whoa, this is like surprisingly good news. I came across such data in this article over at greenbiz.com by Kingsmill Bond, talking about how we are perhaps, and in part because of the war in Ukraine, looking at right now peak fossil fuel, and it's all downhill from here, from the fossil fuel industry's point of view. This is according to data from British Petroleum. Global energy demand has grown at 1% a year, but solar and wind are averaging a 20% per year increase in their availability. Solar and wind are meeting 2/3 of the growth in energy demand. Hydro, nuclear, and biomass supply enough to make up the rest. In other words, as we're using more energy, we're not using more fossil fuels. Let's see, before the war, solar and wind sources of electricity were cheaper than fossil fuels in 85% of the world at today's fossil fuel prices. As a result of the war, they're cheaper everywhere. Solar and wind potential is 100 times the amount of energy that fossil fuels produce for us. And I could go on from there, but I want to introduce Dr. Michael Mann, one of the world's leading climate scientists, distinguished professor of meteorology, the director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University, member of the National Academy of Sciences, recipient of the Tyler Prize, author of several books, including most recently, The New Climate War, and before that, The Madhouse Effect. Michael Mann with 2Ns.net is his website. Michael E. Mann with 2 Ns is his Twitter handle. Dr. Mann, welcome back to the program. Is it true that, we are pretty much worldwide, or at least in the developed world, reaching the point where we really don't need more fossil fuels, and B, that this war in Ukraine is actually might be the pivot point for an awful lot of positive change?
Yeah, hi, Tom. It's good to be with you. And yeah, there is a bit of good news here. Look, carbon emissions have basically flatlined now. They're not going up anymore globally. That's the good news. And that is due in large part to the fact that we've seen huge growth in renewable energy, larger and larger share of our energy now here in the United States and around the world is coming from renewable sources. So that's the good news. Carbon emissions have stopped rising. The bad news is we've got to bring them down, and we've got to bring them down quickly, about 50% within the next decade, and all the way down to zero by the middle of this century. So there's a lot of work left to be done, but there's a little bit of good news here, as you report. And there's also some good news. There was a study that came out just this week that shows that if you tally up the commitments coming out of the Glasgow conference, the COP26 conference some months ago, and that was, regarded by some climate advocates as a disappointment. But if you actually look at all the commitments now we have from the countries of the world, it's now enough to keep warming potentially below 2 degrees Celsius. Now, again, that's good news. It's about half of where we were headed. We were headed towards 4 degrees Celsius back at the time of the Paris Agreement. So now it's potentially under 2. That's still not good enough. We've got to keep that warming below 1.5 Celsius to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And we've got to make sure that, countries make good on their commitments, that they're not just talking the talk, but actually walking the walk as well. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to keep the pressure on our politicians and on the fossil fuel industry, on the energy industry. But yeah, we're seeing some progress here, which is important. There's urgency, but as I like to tell people, there is agency. We can still do this. That's great news. We have here in the building where where our studios are, there's some trees out in front. And one of them is about half dead. I mean, now it's spring, right? So all the buds are coming out, so we can actually see the health of the trees around us. One of them's half dead, the other's about a third dead. A giant dead spot on it. Both of these trees wilted during that 3 days of 116-degree heat that we had last year with that heat dome. That was something that was never predicted, correct me if I'm wrong, by the climate models and the prognostications of how climate change was going to play out at 1 degree Celsius, which is where we are right now, I believe. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. What
what are we learning about what we didn't know, what we didn't expect? How wild can things get, and how wild are they getting going forward?
Yeah, well, we've learned uncertainty isn't our friend here. As we see more of the impacts play out, often we're seeing worse impacts. We're seeing more warming or more extreme events than the models predicted, more melting of the ice and rise in sea level than the models predicted. So the models that we've used to project into the future, by some measure, have been conservative. And they're conservative in part because the real world is somewhat more dynamic than the world described by our models. And that's definitely true when it comes to extreme weather events like that heat dome that you all experienced out in the Pacific Northwest last summer. These extreme heat events, these heat waves, these wildfires, floods, superstorms, larger tornado outbreaks. These sorts of extreme events are fairly difficult to capture in these global models. Sometimes they involve behavior in the jet stream where sort of air masses sort of get locked into place. The jet stream kind of slows down and it exhibits these huge wiggles, which gives you these big high and low pressure centers where you get extreme weather. The physics of that is pretty complicated, and the models are often run at a resolution where they may not be capturing some of the important physics. And some of our own research has been in that area to understand those mechanisms and to understand why they might not be well captured in current models. So the bottom line is the models, when it comes to, for example, these extreme weather events that we're seeing, have been conservative in what they've predicted. We're seeing extreme weather events that are more extreme than what the models predicted.
So over at the New York Times, Farhad Manjoo is writing, "We're in a fossil fuel war, Biden should say so." And, pointing out that were we not, we being, the world and Europe in particular, so dependent on Russia for their fossil fuels, if 20 years ago when Angela Merkel was negotiating the first deals with Russia to supply Germany in particular with oil and natural gas, if instead she had gone the direction that the Greens were pushing her and done it all with expanding the 100,000 rooftop program, things like that, more renewables, that the world would not be in this mess. And I'm not talking about climate change mess. I'm talking about a geopolitical mess. To what extent are climate scientists looking at situations like this that really ultimately have nothing to do with the climate on their surface, but underneath that could have huge impact, number one, in terms of driving a faster shift to renewables, and number two, in this 20-year procrastination that we just lived through?
Yeah, well, look, Russia has been involved in a major disinformation effort for years now, using cyber warfare, using bot armies online to try to sort of weaponize climate change misinformation and disinformation. Their main asset, they are a petrostate. Their primary asset is their fossil fuels, and they want to monetize that asset. And so they have used again, sort of cyber warfare in an effort to prevent the fuels and the fossil fuels of these petrostates like Russia and Saudi Arabia that have propped them up, that have built them up. And we would not be in the position that we're in right now. We would not be dealing with this latest aggression by Russia were it not for the fact that they have assembled a daunting military infrastructure because of all of that money that's come from our buying of their fossil fuels. And they're using that right now as a cudgel to prevent, for example, Europe, that's still dependent on their gas and oil, to prevent the European countries from taking stronger sanctions against them over the actions in Ukraine. So look, both of these things are symptomatic of our dependence on fossil fuels. The climate crisis, which is getting worse as we continue to burn fossil fuels, and this geopolitical crisis that we're in, which is a manifestation of our historical reliance on these petrostates for their fossil fuels. The solution to all of these things is to get off fossil fuels and to do so as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it seems like a good idea. And now U.S. demand for fossil fuels peaked in 2007. It's now down 10%. This is some good news here. Professor Michael Mann, as his most recent book, The New Climate War. Be sure and get a copy of it. Dr. Mann, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you, my friend.
It's always good talking to you.
You too.
Thank you. Michael E. Mann with 2 N's on Twitter. michaelmann.net on the internet. We'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So what are you doing to help solve the climate crisis? And what do you think we really should be doing on a macro scale? And welcome back, 16 minutes past the hour. And let me get my mouse back here. There we go. Terry in Ventura, California. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Great to talk to you. Tom, an aside before my main point, a story today in the Banter called The Horrifying Lessons Republicans Have Taken from Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. But as an aside about Governor DeSantis, remember when he was lying about the healthcare data and he suppressed that data manager and had her home invaded by a bunch of stormtroopers at his beck and call by the state police?
Whatever happened with that, by the way? I haven't heard from her, and that was a year or so ago.
I believe he gave up on it because his position was sort of illegal.
Yeah, there you go.
But my main point, Tom, please, The Banter is a publication of Ben Cohen, okay? I don't know if you've read it from time to time.
I have. I know Ben. I've known Ben for years.
Great publication, Tom. Anyway, this story in today's Banter talks about the parallel between Putin's attacking Ukraine because there's Nazis there, and what the Republicans are doing to call us all pedophiles.
Yeah, I read it this morning.
You did read it. Okay. I thought that was a very scary article because what would they do? Remember Fred Upton says, hey, sane people aren't running for Congress because we're all afraid and they're calling us pedophiles?
Right.
The end point, Tom, remember this story and the end of it? Can you imagine Josh Hawley as chair of judiciary, or let's say DeSantis were appoint John Eastman as the attorney general? And they were going to, lock Hillary up? Would they actually, could we have like blacklist Joe McCarthy style return to us? And what would they do to us?
Well, we have before. We certainly have before. And my expectation is that if Ron DeSantis becomes president, probably within a year, this program will be off the air and I might even be in jail. I mean, it's just, I'm looking at this with clear eyes. I've seen this happen in country after country. I've been in countries where it's happened. I've been in countries when it's happening. And, fascism is very, very seductive. There's always going to be a base for fascism in every country in the world.
Tom, what ended McCarthyism? It was Edward R. Murrow. Do we see an Edward R. Murrow on the horizon?
It was not just Edward R. Murrow. It really was that. It really was the media. I mean, everybody points to that point where I think his name was Robert Welch, the lawyer for the Army. When McCarthy was badgering that kid, and his lawyer, I think it was Welch, said, have you at long last, sir, no common decency, or words to that effect. But it wasn't just his saying that. It was the media echoing it over and over and over again. Because by that point in time, the media had figured out that that McCarthy was a full-blown fascist. That he was like the Nazis. The problem we have now is that our media. I mean, that was 100% of American media was outing Joe McCarthy. All three networks, in other words. Our media now is filled with fifth columns. You got Fox and OAN and all these other right-wing networks that are all in with Putin. They're all in with fascism. They're praising Viktor Orban. You got CPAC going to do a convention over there. You got Tucker Carlson spending a week there, doing everything except shining Orban's shoes. It's not going to be as clean as it was back then, Terry. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at ThomHartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour, and I wanted to share an idea with y'all. Louise and I were talking about this morning, or maybe it was yesterday afternoon. A friend of ours is looking for an apartment right now, or looking for a condo to buy. And, a lot of the condos around here have, you don't get a garage with your condo. It's, but they, they're kind of like, strip mall kind of housing, long strips. And they have carports that you can park in. And the carports typically have electricity because there's a light overhead. The problem is that the electricity in the carports that are, in the parking lots for the condos, the electricity is being provided by the condo itself. So what happens if you own an electric car? Our friend has a car very much like mine. It's a plug-in hybrid. It goes 40 miles on a charge, specifically businesses that had fewer than 5 travelers. So we created a travel agency to do that. And in 3 years, we were doing $6 million a year in business. And I could give you other examples, but I'm not bragging about me. My point is I'm really pretty good at spotting these things. And I think this is a huge market opportunity. Somebody needs to invent a car charger that has built into it a meter so that you can meter the electricity that goes through it. It doesn't need to be large. It could be a little digital thing that's just part of the kind of wall wart that most car chargers have. They typically have a box that's about 6 inches long and about 4 inches wide, maybe 2 inches deep. And it's got screw holes on it. So you can screw it into the wall, or you can screw it onto the post or onto the ceiling of your carport. And then what comes out of that is the little charge unit for your car. So it has a meter built into it so that once a month or once a quarter, whoever is running the condo homeowners association can go around and read everybody's meter and say, okay, your electric bill for your car for this month is $12 or whatever it is. We know that, it's going to cost you about a third to a quarter of what gasoline would cost you. So, people would do that. And then the business would be, first of all, somebody needs to be making these things. And maybe somebody out there already has made one. And if so, let me know. I'd love to know about it. But then 2, the other business, so that's the manufacturing business that I think has huge potential. Because, any apartment building, condo, whatever, where you've got a garage or parking areas and access to electricity, but not meterable electricity, you need this. But number 2, then another business that you could start, and you could create affiliates all over the country, is installing these things. So I would go to a local condo that's got 100 units, and say, I'll electrify all 100 parking spaces for the price of $30, $50 a piece, whatever. I'll come in. I'm a licensed electrician. I'll do the work. You'll have it. We'll get the permits and everything. It'll all be clean. And everybody will have access to electricity in your condo, which raises the value of your condo, because now people who have electric cars are going to want to buy into your condo or your apartment building. I think this is an idea that could make a whole lot of money. as a chronic addict to entrepreneurialism, a chronic entrepreneur. I just wanted to lay that out there. And if there's anybody who's looking to start a business, I think this could be it. Maybe some of the folks I know, were really in with the building trades in Chicago. Maybe somebody's got an idea there.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In fact, this might even be the kind of thing that somebody at IBEW, anywhere in the country for that matter, might want to come up with. There's a lot of possibility here. Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy, Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCatherine gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCatherine saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. So Putin just fired a long-range missile, or test-fired a long-range missile in Russia. You know, one that could, like, say, reach the United States. And he says, this is so that people who would threaten our country should think twice. Right, like we didn't know that he had long-range missiles. This is, like, increasingly reminding me of the guys who, like, walk around flexing their muscles, like, hey, look at me. I got, I'm reminded of the old saying that dogs that bark generally don't bite. Dogs that don't bark are the ones that you have to worry about. There's an awful lot of barking going on here. Not that we don't have to worry about it, but anyhow. Let's pick up your phone calls. It's 35 minutes past the hour. Rick in Irwin, Tennessee. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I'm talking about this drug war stuff. You know what?
Yeah.
It seems to me like the drug wars are over, bro. I mean, I was born in 52, went through all that Nixon. Hey, back in the day, like if you went down to the beach and you tried to sell some pot, like the guys in the Navy would buy it, right? Mm-hmm. And then like when Nancy Reagan come in, then all of a sudden they didn't want to buy pot, they wanted to buy speed. And I asked them why, and they said because pot takes 21 days to get out of your system and speed only takes 3.
Right. Yes, I recall those times. Rick, you live in Tennessee. I mean, you can still go to prison for having pot in Tennessee, can't you?
Oh, yeah, you sure can. I mean, Then I'd
say the drug war is not over.
Like a green thumb or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
But, it could happen. I mean, like I'm 70 years old, bro. I like, what are they going to do to me?
Well, they could put you in jail for the rest of your life. I mean, that's the downside.
Well, hey, listen, the fucking sheriff's come.
I'm sorry, Bill. Whatever his name was, we can't allow that kind of language on the air. It's 36 minutes past the hour. Bill in Brooksville, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I want to thank you for being there. Also, thank your girl that works for you. She's really good. I listened to you on WMNF, and just the last couple of days since Disney came out against the "Don't Say Gay" thing.
Mm-hmm.
DeSantis is threatening to take them to court to look at down in Florida, Disney's like a self-governing unit, okay, and they govern themselves, and DeSantis wants to take them to court.
It's like they've got their own fire department and their own police department. That's what we're talking about, aren't we?
Yeah, well, that, and, they run their whole thing. There aren't any, as far as I know, people in the government above them.
Right.
But DeSantis is threatening them with, looking this over, and for him to do that is kind of shooting himself in the foot, because Disney is not only Disney, it's ESPN, it's ABC, it's a big media place. And I can't imagine that he could be president if ABC was against him, is my only thought. I was just wondering,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. I'm wondering, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what these self-governing units are. I don't pretend to be an expert on Disney and Florida, the relationship between the two. But it seems like if a large part of the self-governing unit meant that Disney is running their own police, their own fire within Disneyland, and Ron DeSantis says you can't do that anymore, then now Ron DeSantis has to pay for police and fire, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that too. It's just that taking on Disney would be a big mistake if he wanted to be president.
Yeah.
And if he does this, I think we can just write him off.
Yeah. Well, I from your lips to God's ears, Bill. I hope that you're right. Thanks a lot for the call, Mike in Reading, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Just want to tell you I haven't been this hopeful in a while to see a young Democrat come out and eviscerate a Republican for their hateful agenda, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, you're talking about Mallory McMorrow, State Senator Mallory McMorrow in Michigan.
Absolutely. Now, what we need is more of that, and we need more on the national level. I think
yes,
it would be a game changer, maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Mike. It's why I headlined my rant yesterday, my op-ed. The Democrats are suffering from an outrage deficiency. We need more of that. And the reason why she went so viral is because all over the country, people are going, yes, this is how you talk back. And we really, really, truly need that. So, yeah, I'm with you. Mike, Thank you. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. Larry in Chicago. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, you had just asked, what am I doing to fix climate change or fight it? I'm the president of 350 Chicago. We are an affiliate chapter of 350.org, the kibbutz organization. We just worked with the city council here in the city of Chicago and the treasurer's office, and just got the city of Chicago to divest itself from fossil fuels.
Whoa, that's a big deal.
It is. We worked with them. We started this about 7 or 8 years ago. Actually, I was inspired by your program. I heard an interview with a climate scientist, and it kind of freaked me out. And myself and another woman started this group, and we've been working on this for the last 7 or 8 years. And it finally came to fruition on March 24th of this year. The city of Chicago divested $70 million out of the money that they used to operate the city's portfolio and operate the city's business. And they did it over 18 months. And so it was a long, hard slog. But I just want to say that persistence and keeping at it and organizing and making sure you don't give up can make a big difference in accomplishing a goal of, basically for us, it was divesting the city of Chicago fossil fuel assets.
That's brilliant.
And it was a long fight, but we stood in it and we accomplished our goal.
Good on you. Larry, congratulations. Is there a website so if people listening in Chicago want to check it out or join with you?
Yes, it would be, you could just, go in your favorite search engine and go 350 Chicago, or it's more formally world.350chicago.org. World.350chicago.org. Okay, got it. Larry, thank you very much, and keep up the great work, and good on you.
Chaz in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Chaz, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, long-term listener since the Air America days and Bernie Democrat here. Just wanted to quickly say, love your idea about the electric meters. A quick note to that to add, aside from installing them, you might also need people to read those meters remotely via software or in remote areas where there's no access. You may need people to read them manually if there's no cell towers and things like that. Plus potentially technicians to repair them. So
it's another business opportunity or another service that you could provide. If you really wanted to get fancy, you could build little digital meter contraptions, into these modules, into these charging modules, and put a connection to a cell tower. And because you can buy these, access to T-Mobile or Sprint or what, to their networks. You can buy them really cheap and large scale. This is how, your car gets information. It gets it off.
Exactly.
And the subscriptions are, $10, $15 a year as opposed to per month at the wholesale level. And so, you could take an entire condo with 300 meters, put them all on the cell signal. And, once a day or even once a week, they're just pinging one little bit of data. And so it's not much load on the system. But then you could remotely, the person running the condo or the rental unit could remotely read all the meters instantly. I mean, it could be automated for that matter.
And if they ever break down, you may need technicians to come back out and repair them or whatever. So there's lots of potential there.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's a great one. Chaz, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Brian in Arvada, California. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. I wanted to address your question of what we can do to help the climate crisis. I am actually a home energy contractor. I sell insulation and solar panels.
Hey, good on you.
And there's three things thank you. There's three things that any homeowner can do to really help do their part. Which is insulate their attic, install solar panels, and use those solar panels to power an electric car. There is a kind of insulation called cellulose insulation. It's a blown insulation that is made out of ground recycled newspaper. So you're literally using a recycled product to lower the gas and energy usage to heat and cool your home. And with solar panels, any solar contractor can look at your usage for a year and size out saying, this is how much energy you need to power what you've been doing. And what you can do is oversize your system to account for extra electricity that you're going to use to power an electric car. You buy an electric car, and then you don't have any gas expenditure.
Wow. Now, one idea I've got one part of my house has a flat roof, but it's got one part of the roof that kind of sticks up. And it sticks up at an angle where it's facing south. It's nowhere near a large enough area to power the entire house. But what I was thinking, but it could support probably four or five solar panels, and like 2 by 3 foot solar panels. And so what I was thinking was putting solar panels on that part of the roof, using them, running a wire down to the garage and feeding a battery. And then having that battery with a 110 inverter drive the charger for my electric car. So it's not part of my house electrical system. I don't need to worry about feed-in tariffs or have all those fancy meters and things. It would be a standalone separate system. But then all of my car, I would be basically driving my car for free forever. Is that viable?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And for people that don't have enough room on their roof, you can it's relatively easy to build a patio cover, a flat patio cover if you have the room in your backyard, and you can put, solar panels on there.
Wow. So lots and lots of options. Brian, good on you. I wish I knew of a good solar contractor here in Portland. Every time we've tried to look around, we just get lost, But
Home Advisor is a great source to find contractors for insulation or solar.
Okay, yeah. Home Advisor is now owned by Angie, so that would be who's an advertiser.
Very impressive, Tom.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Brian, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's 46 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls on the other side of this break. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truth to the multinational corporations, but really rather you didn't know all about. And welcome back. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hello, Tom, and a good day to you.
Back at you, Bob.
Yeah, good work. Good work. And your book, Walking the Blues Away, is timeless. I think it will always be that way.
I think it's the most important book I've written, or maybe the second most, behind Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
It's wonderful. It's universal knowledge. It's so useful. It should be required reading for any sane person who hasn't tapped into that consciousness yet. Thank you. And, this thing about, there's endless possibilities for new business and stuff. Your idea about the electric car is fantastic. And just lots of stuff. The problem is there's as much chronic obstruction going on in the legal world, and that leads me right back to the main point I was going to come to, and I'll be quick as I can about it. I'm all for the industry, the legalized industry of marijuana, but not without hemp too, because it's really a most useful plant, most versatile, most productive plant for making materials that we're now using the forest.
But hemp growers and CBD sellers have no problem using the public banking system, or not the public, but using our banking system here in America right now, whereas marijuana dispensaries and pot growing operations are having to do their business based on cash, which is really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. Here's the rub. My point of view, and I think the point of view that the earlier caller was trying to make, I don't know, essentially is, don't make it illegal. Don't criminalize people who don't want to be part of the larger systems. Don't make it a requirement to license and do all this card carrying stuff. That's not going to work. There's a whole industry going on with or without any of that. So you need to tap the Federalist Society and all this hardcore legalese needs to tap into the common sense of what, for instance, Greta is saying, and stop blah, blah, blahing us to death. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Good to hear from you. Julie in Posen, Michigan. Hey, Julie, what's up?
I have a statement and a question. I think that Sweden and Finland are joining NATO, not just because of Russia, but because they're worried the U.S. is going to go right.
That's a possibility. Trump taught Europe a scary lesson.
Yeah. And, well, we're all scared here, too. I mean, if we're scared, everybody else knows more than we do because we're getting bombarded with crap.
Yep.
Anyway, what chance does NATO have without U.S. backing? If we get Ron DeSantis as president and we get out of NATO and we join Russia, what chance does NATO have against all of the right?
Not much.
Crap?
Not much. Because NATO is based, all the NATO activity is based in all those individual countries in Europe, whereas the United States, on behalf of NATO, can project power from India, from Pakistan, we've got 700 bases all around the world, and all of them can be employed in the service of NATO. No other NATO country can do that or say that. So, Julie, you have identified a really, really critical point that I think the rest of the NATO members are swallowing hard about. Julie, thank you for the call. They're also worried about Le Pen in France, who's said that she'll pull France out of NATO. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Remember Paul Manafort? He used to be business partners with Roger Stone back in the day, working for Republican politicians like, Nixon and Reagan. And well, in 2004, he took a really sweet gig over in Ukraine, helping the Russians, President Putin, install Viktor Yanukovych as the president of Ukraine, a nice Putin puppet. That same year, though, the people of Ukraine said enough, and basically Yanukovych got driven out of the country. So they tried it again in 2010. Let's bring, this Putin puppet back into Ukraine, Yanukovych. And it worked until 2014 when they got kicked out. So he gets kicked out of Ukraine, Manafort. So what does he do the next year, 2015? He decides to run the Trump campaign. Are you starting to see a pattern here? Yeah, could be. Okay, there's an entire video that outlines this whole timeline over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back to 52 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Joel in Slidell, Louisiana. Hey, Joel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Happy 420.
Thank you. Back at you.
I was calling because something that you said earlier about dogs barking and biting. Mm-hmm. I was thinking that actually earlier before because of how inept and useless Russia's army has proven to be. In effect, when everybody thought they were so big and bad before. So is it too much of a stretch to think that maybe their nuclear arsenal is not all everybody thinks it is?
I think that's probably an inference that's reasonable to draw.
Right. That's all.
Do you have any evidence for it, or you just wanted to put that out?
No. Just basically because Putin's acting the way he's acting. His behavior, basically, and what you were pointing out that he's posturing. When if he had nukes, maybe he would have used them already.
Yeah, I get it. Joel, thank you for the call. Carol in Republic, Michigan. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm just calling to help your friend out that was looking for a place, a condominium near you, mm-hmm. and a place for her electric car to be charged.
Right.
I looked it up on my search engine, and I see a number of them in here, and they price out from anywhere from like $200, $250, all the way up to $2,200. And they're pretty neat-looking little individual charging stations and they're metered electric car chargers.
They're metered because the ones that I've seen, I mean, I own a couple of them because I've got an electric car or a plug-in hybrid. And the ones that I'm seeing are not, they don't have a meter on them. They don't have a way of tracking how much electricity is passing through them. You're finding those, actually?
When I put it into my search engine, I had a number of them come up.
Huh. So somebody got there ahead of me. Okay,
maybe I need to get one here to look at it, but based on what I'm seeing, check it out. If they're legitimate, they look like they're very price friendly.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, Carol, then we need here in Portland somebody to buy a whole bunch of those things and then go around to all the condos and say, hey, for $50 a parking lot, I will install these things or whatever it's going to cost, plus to make a nice living, and do it and point out to them that you will increase the value of your condo or your apartment building. You can. Whatever. That's great. Carol, I'm going to have to do some Googling. Thank you for that. I appreciate the call. Marilyn in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I am flying up to Canada next week. I'm 62 and I've had all 4 shots, so it's not a huge concern to me, and I'll still wear my mask. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Canada, they have before their legislature to put a wealth tax on the 5 biggest banks. And take because they made record profits and put it into programs to help ordinary Canadians. But what I'm calling about is last week you talked to Rokana, and we were talking about DCs, direct contracting entities, REACH, that they're trying to rebrand it to, or ACOs.
Right.
And I just
the privatization of
Medicare.
Yes.
Correct. And I just want the warning out there that everything I read shows that they are 40 to 60% of the way there, and they fully expect and are confident that by 2030 they will be completely privatized.
You're absolutely right, Marilyn, and I've seen those same statistics, and it scares the hell out of me. It's a disaster.
Me too.
It's a disaster for people on Medicare, and this whole Medicare Advantage scam, or the so-called Medicare Part C scam. Now they've changed their scam. Marilyn, thank you. Thanks for the heads up on that. And thank you for being with us today. We really, truly appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, spread the good word. Tell your friends and neighbors how they can find good progressive media. There's a lot of it goes beyond even this show. And get out there and get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.